tennis shoes, my heels are not sustainable to the feet. But my outfit is totally sustainable. I want to bring out my panel, but first I just want to share a quick fact. Fashion is the second dirtiest industry in the world. Fashion and textiles are second to the oil industry. So just put that in your cap. I'm going to introduce my panel, Alexx Monkarsh, sustainable fashion designer of Dame, Rosetta Getty, fashion designer, Kathleen Talbot, VP Operations and Sustainability of Reformation, and Sean Barron, co-founder of Redone. Are you guys coming? All right. So I guess we'll start with the easy question. And maybe since Alexx is closest to me, we'll start with, why is it important today to be sustainable as a fashion designer? What does it mean? Why does it matter?
I think it matters, first of all, because I think people are wanting to become more educated. As the Generation X or the millennials, they want to know what they're putting on. They want to know what they're eating. They're just a very educated, or they're trying to be educated all the time, which I think is amazing. So I think that that's why it's important, and our world is changing, and we need to start, waking up and doing these things and letting everyone know that we're all going to do this, so we're all in it together.
Right.
So I think that's kind of why it's important.
And I mean, you could say that there was a huge revolution in in food. Could it be said that we'll see the same thing happen in fashion with sustainability and responsibly made clothing? Do you think we'll see that, Kathleen?
Yeah, I think that's actually a nice parallel that we talk about a lot too, where the same consciousness about what you eat, maybe the car that you drive, is starting to sort of infiltrate into really the mainstream understanding of the impact of fashion and what we wear now. And I think, like you set it up so perfectly. If fashion is the second largest consumer of water, second or third, depending on what you read, dirtiest industry. If 1 in 6 people globally has something to do with making your clothes, it's become really an imperative. It's not something that we get to choose whether we want to participate in, but the impact of fashion is so enormous that we all have to think about the best way to start advocating for solutions and really doing things differently.
Absolutely. Rosetta, you have a brand, and you are kind of new to the sustainability kind of mindset. Can you explain maybe why you've decided to move in this direction and how you're doing it?
Well, I have an NGO in Haiti, and it sort of, started after the earthquake. My good friend and I went down to Haiti, and we looked into the issues and how we could help, and it really all came down to that it was just completely contaminated and destroyed. And so that was sort of the way I started learning about it. And everything is something that we can turn around, and it's such a big issue, and that the answer to that question is just so huge. But, I have always been, since I've known about it, since then, been so involved and so interested in it, and the ways that we participate are right now there's so much interesting technology. They're actually figuring out how to dye without water, which is just going to change the whole industry in such a huge way. Absolutely. But that's something that we're actively participating in and working on right now. And that's just one of the ways, but it's something that, I've really cared about and participated in for a long time.
It's amazing. I want to hear from Sean. I don't want to leave you out down there. Talk about Redone, because you all are sustainable in a way and responsible in a way that maybe isn't obvious, because, well, we'll get to that about everyone talking to their consumer, but would you explain a little bit about what you do, and are you intentionally being sustainable? I
mean, we didn't start with the idea of it being sustainable. We started with the idea of doing a cool company and taking vintage Levi's and remaking them into fits for women, because that was a pain point for most people. They wanted to have a cool jean, and they wanted to wear Levi's, but they didn't know how. So we kind of started with solving a problem. But then, as soon as we started hiring people younger than me, we started realizing that we're actually we're doing something that's sustainable and upcycling vintage Levi's. So we're not 100% sustainable, but we're 100% mindful. And we've turned into a very mindful company. We only produce 90% of our clothes within 15 miles of our company. We won't work with anybody outside of that radius for the carbon footprint. And and every single day, we learn more about sustainability from the people that work for us who are all in their early 20s. And you ask them every day what's important to them, and we ask that every day. And it's sustainability, giving. They want our company to start giving more to other, more charitable events. So sustainability is a big word, but I think mindful is even a bigger word for our company, and how to be mindful in everything we do with our company, and then in our lives too. Yeah. So our whole company is based on that at this point.
Yeah, I think if we all kind of slowed down and were more mindful in general, the world might be just a little bit more peaceful.
I think sustainable is mindfulness. I think that's what it is.
Thinking about everything you do.
It's thinking about everything you make. Yeah, everything you do, everything you make, and you're kind of putting yourself into what you're doing with passion, mindfulness, and sustainability.
Slowing down the process.
Yeah.
Thinking about it. So those are all big words, mindfulness, sustainability, responsibility, obviously just the whole, even innovation, all the new innovation that's coming, it's all very academic, and it's big, and it's not very sexy sounding. And I know, coming from my side of it, my job has been as a influencer or even as a fashion model is to try to take all of this and try to make it interesting for the consumer and palatable for the layman and enjoyable. So I'd love to hear from all of you one at a time, kind of, how are you relating this to consumers? Are you even relating it? And what ways, are you relating this to consumers?
Do you want me to jump in? You're looking at me. I'll take it. Well, we actually, kind of on this other side of the spectrum, we started in 2009 with the intention of having sustainability be the core mission and driver of Reformation. And that was really a response to our founder, Yael Aflalo's history working in conventional fashion, starting a successful brand and wanting to do things really differently. Again, with that intentionality, with that mindfulness to say, how do we flip it? How do we create a different business model? How do we really drive for this stuff? And that was almost a decade ago, and at the time, they were actually really discouraging her investors, her friends. Everyone was saying, like, don't lead with being eco-friendly. Like, that is, to your point, it's not cool, it's not hip. You have this, like, cool fashion girl vibe, like, don't kill it, basically, by starting a green business. And she just was like, well, I'm gonna do it anyways. And I would say that we're still learning the best way to like fold in the mission and the story. But one of the things that's a good challenge for I think all of us is to say, how do we elevate the idea that you can be sustainable and fashionable, that you don't have to be looking at trade-offs, that you can be a product-first company and make beautiful things that you would want to buy anyways. And I think that's been a real driver for us as a brand, and we're thinking about design and storytelling storytelling. On the flip side, we're totally geeky about the sustainability stuff. Like, we think that fiber science and dye stuffs and all this stuff is really critical to moving the needle. And so we try to bring our customers along with us, and we probably give them more information than they necessarily are looking for. But I think if you do it in a layered way, you can like come up with the punchy, like, being naked is the #1 best option, or #2, and like hook them a little bit. And then those that want to learn more, we publish everything, right? We publish a life cycle for every product that we sell, which is heavy. You're talking about pounds of CO2 and gallons of water and embedded impact that isn't necessarily accessible, but I think if we can mainstream the conversation and make that information available and really educate about the impact of fashion and some of these sustainable responses, I think that's going a long way in terms of normalizing the conversation.
And it helps, too, that you have a great product.
Yeah, lead with the product.
Lead with the product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel the same way. Like when I started, I think 12 years ago when I came, and I had this line that was going to be all sustainable, and I was so excited. Everyone shut me down. They were like, no one cares. Like, it's not cool. Like, the same thing. And I was like, okay. And I had to kind of rework it. And I realized that at the end of the day, they want to see good fit, they want the fabric to feel good. I mean, back in 10 years ago, every time you would say sustainable or eco, they would be like, oh, the fabric must feel horrible. And you kind of have to show that, it's still cool, sexy, chic, all those words, and it happens to be a sustainable company. And so we have the same struggles, but I feel now it's so different. And now everyone and this generation wants to know that things, where they're coming from, and wants to be part of the whole conversation. So in the new company that I'm doing, it's really exciting because I'm making it accessible for everyone to follow our process, and down to where we package things, we make it interactive. We'll have, we'll be packaging it in a bag that they can reuse, and we'll show them ways how they can reuse it. So I think we're in this new world now that's amazing to turn over in that sustainable fashion and be accepted and loved and think it's really cool. Yeah. Just like Sean said, all his young 20-year-olds like that he's sustainable when he didn't even know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we approach it not so much as like in your face, like Reformation might, but we always message it in our emails and everything. Like, if it's upcycled, we say always upcycled. If it's within 15 miles, we say 15 miles. We're also doing something I think is important, is we're creating American heritage to be sustainable, which is a really interesting kind of idea of taking something that has been mass marketed and taking it to the designer level. So our brand's a luxury brand, so it's not for us to talk about how much water we're saving, but we quietly talk about it in messaging, and people know about it, and so they're very happy to. I mean, we get lots of DMs on Instagram, and people say, we love what you do. We're very excited that you're doing this, and so you kind of like, oh, wait a minute, this is becoming important. So that's how we educate our people. Very like under the radar, but still part of the dialogue. It's always part of the dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Rosetta, do you want to speak to this? How you're messaging, or you feel?
We don't really talk about it at all. Mm-hmm. It just isn't part of the conversation, really.
And in some ways, I mean, hopefully, we'll get to that point where it doesn't have to be a conversation. This is just a norm, so that it's not either a marketing tool or that we have to explain every part of the process. But until then, we're kind of at the place where we have to educate, we have to bring awareness, and people want it, which is what you all are saying too. Your consumers are wanting it. Let's see, what else? What are the challenges? Because you all have been very successful, all of you, but there has to be challenges to this. So, is it finding new innovations? Is it labor? Is it making it here in the U.S.? What are the issues? Is it just actually having the information and knowing how to do this? as a designer, what do you feel are the pain points of really becoming a sustainable company?
I mean, my challenge always is being a price point that's comparable to other people, having a contemporary line and being at the same price point, when, it'd be a lot easier if I just shipped it off to China. It would save me so much money and time and research. But at the same time, it's so satisfying doing it this way and kind of finding loopholes or, going to find dead stock. We do a lot of the same thing. It's like fun. It's a fun experience. So trying to source sustainable fabric. But that's my biggest challenge, is keeping the price to a certain point that's competitive and attainable.
I think my first response is that it doesn't have to be that hard. I think that's sort of feeding to this idea that it's really prohibitive, it's so hard, there's nothing out there, where at least the low-hanging stuff should actually be pretty plug and play, where it's like you have the same fabrication, but you're replacing it with a recycled fiber content, or you're swapping tencel for cotton, and some of these things that are not necessarily more expensive and not necessarily more like technical or as demanding on our teams. And so I think that really trying to focus on those and celebrate those wins is a good way to make it more accessible for the big players and the small players alike to really start to embrace, even if it's sort of this incremental move to more sustainable fashion. And so that's one thing that we talk about a lot, which is like, yes, that might only get you 50% of the way there, and going from that point to get that last 50% towards this strive for a more sustainable fashion is really hard, right? It requires incredible amount of buy-in, both internally and with your supply chain. It might mean that you really have to fundamentally change how you design and buy. The innovations getting there, but sometimes it's more expensive. We haven't reached economies of scale yet. So there is all this complexity to going that last 50%. But one of the things we talk to new designers, we get a lot of questions and feedback, and they're looking for inspiration, and they're looking for the roadmap, basically. And it's saying, at least start with those first things. Let's not start with the challenges, which I know sounds a little counterintuitive, because otherwise, you do feel a little more paralyzed, or you think that it's too challenging.
Yeah, I mean, we often have felt that it can be. People get discouraged, even big brands get discouraged to change, to pivot this way, because it seems too overwhelming and there's so much information. And yet I think it's really exciting as somebody that, I like problem solving. And to me, it seems so exciting because there's endless amounts of new jobs that could be created here. And though we're in an antiquated industry, there's a whole revolution of new technology and innovation and creativity that could just, blow what we're doing out of the water right now. So I think it's actually really exciting.
It's exciting.
Fun.
And it's also not even, if you go further about the clothes, like one of my factories that we've used for a while, I noticed they didn't have recycling bins. And I noticed that they, were completely, there was styrofoam everywhere, basic stuff, basic 101 that I was taught when I was a kid that they're just not educated on. And I literally was like, can I give a lesson at my factory? I'm like, can I give you a recycling bin? He's like, well, I don't know who would pick it up. And I called the place and I got them to pick it up. It's beyond clothes. It's a lifestyle. And when you're in any business, you can go beyond your business to again, wherever, to offices, or you could find whatever you can to make their life more sustainable and educate people beyond just the clothes, So I've found that amazing in itself, that now my factory is not completely green, but they are going in the green direction, and they're excited and they think it's cool. They're like, okay.
I mean, that kind of speaks to the responsibility that we have, I think, as an industry that's kind of so important. It shapes culture. We influence music, and music influences fashion. Fashion's in film, fashion's in art, fashion's in everything. We have to get dressed daily. So it's interesting that our industry has a possibility of completely really bringing the environmental issue to the forefront and maybe making huge strides in changing it.
Yeah.
And it's just an interesting conversation that, like, even, talking about your factory, that they might not know something small like that you're using your knowledge to change it. And, I would love for you all to speak about, like, kind of, as individuals, but as a company, and as, like I said, fashion influences everyone. So how can we take this, not just in our clothes, but like out into the world? That's what we're doing here at EMA today in the summit. Like, what can we do? Like, how can we continue to be great stewards and influence each other?
I think you got to stay true to your mission. Everything Alexx was saying, we as people in the fashion business have to stay true to our mission. That's the best we can do, and continue to talk about it and help our factories. She's talking, I'm like, shit, I'm going to hire someone now to just, like, I just thought I'm going to hire someone to do just that, like go to the factories and help them become more sustainable. So our job is to continue staying the course. I think that's the most that we can do, and talk about it at events like this, or just continue to talk about it through our Instagram and be stay the course. I think that's the most important thing that we could do here.
I like that.
I think we have a lot of spheres of influence. We sometimes do a lot of things that are just internal to the Reformation team. We're 450 people, but we show up every day. Everyone's trying to do their best. And I like what Alexx talked about in terms of lifestyle. We get the best ideas from, like, our own team that might not have they might not have sustainability in their title, but they're super passionate about it. They have ideas for what we could do for product, or even for awareness. They're so cute. They call themselves the Planeteers, and they will, like, just educate themselves about sustainable lifestyle, and like what are those easy things that we can do and have more intentionality in how we live every day. So I think even just thinking about your own brand as a sphere of influence is really helpful. And sometimes that's one of the things when we're doing anything new, we say, okay, what should this mean in terms of engagement and marketing in our own team that no one needs to know about except for us? That's fine, but it's really important. What does this look like from our customer? And sometimes we don't want to talk about it to our customer because, again, it's getting in the weeds, or we really do try to separate some of our sustainability messaging with, like, buy this thing, because that does get a kind of a convoluted space. But if we're investing in a new fiber, or we have something, microplastics is really hot right now. You're like, what microplastics, the impact of synthetics. When we're washing, we're like, what's our role? Is there a way that we could talk to our customer? What are their actual solutions right now? How could we be a part of that conversation? And then I think thinking about just our influence as a brand across the supply chain. So even as a medium-sized company, you have incredible influence in terms of your purchasing power. And so your idea of, like, your example, rather, of going to your factory and asking if they want to green up their operations, or I know we were talking backstage about even, like, working with an overseas factory. If you start asking the questions and asking for a different type of principled practice, a lot of times they are willing to adopt it. And all of a sudden, your influence and your impact is getting magnified by your partners. So I think you have your internal team, you have your customer, but you also have your supply chain. And I think it's really important to think about how you can exercise a really positive influence in all three areas.
I was more of a, recently we are looking for silk fabric, which is actually organic. I mean, it's a natural fiber. But I wanted to find an upcycling. I wanted to get dead stock of it. And I literally went to every place in downtown, and I would go in and I'd be like, do you have any dead stock? And they would say no, or they'd be like, yeah, we'll bring it in from China. And I'm like, no, like, that's not what I wanted. But I found this one guy who was like, I don't have anything eco, but we did this really cool thing where we took scraps on the floor and made it into a new fabric. And I'm like, that's eco. And he's like, it is? And like, he like had no idea. And he got so excited. And he literally now is like, I feel like he's like, oh my God, do you mind if I sell this to other people? And I'm like, of course. But it's like, that's the whole point. You're giving your knowledge to other people that might not even know what they're doing is amazing and current and sustainable. So I think that's what's amazing about all of us, that we can go and open the eyes to other people, that wouldn't realize, and get them excited,
And you are all making here in LA, except you, Rosetta, right? Is it important to be close to home where you're designing your clothes, and does it matter if you're producing close by? I mean, I think it would, but I'd like to hear, because I think supply chain is somewhat a bigger issue in manufacturing and all of that, because you have less control. Am I right? As soon as it gets out of your hands, you don't have your eyes on it as much. So talk about supply chain deeper and having your brand manufactured here or close to home.
I mean, we have our own factory that we built because no one was crazy enough to take apart a pair of jeans and make new ones out of them. So we got pushback from every factory in LA, so we just built our own factory. And then we realized that the people that work for us in our factory were artisans, so we paid them a much better wage than other factories. And happily to do that because, again, no one really liked the idea of taking apart a pair of jeans, and now we've gone through 87,000 pairs of them. So now it's like, we know how to do it, and these people are a big part of our community that built the jeans for us. And also, we manufacture 90% of the stuff that we do in LA, and we also are very entrenched in all what we call rag houses in LA. So where we buy the Levi's and we buy a lot of other product that we then reconstruct and make into new clothes. So being close to the supply chain for us is important. And price point is not our problem ever. So we're not so mindful of what we charge for things because the way we make them is better.
Right.
So yeah, being close to home is great. To be honest, because when we do make some stuff offshore, like we mentioned a minute ago, it's not as great.
Yeah.
So we'd rather not do that.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, certain things are not made well in certain countries, and there's certain things that we don't make well in LA. That the quality, or then the price becomes super prohibitive, that it becomes a $3,000 sweater when it should be a $300 sweater because there's no machines here for that. So then we have to monitor our supply chain offshore, and we do the best that we can. And it's not easy, but like everybody's been saying, we implement as much as we can in terms of control. We make sure they're reputable. We visit them. We make sure it's there's no child labor and things like that. So, but again, backing up, being in LA is great for us from the supply chain aspect. It's fantastic.
Well, I would also assume that the more fashion brands and more designers are pushing their supply chain, whether it's local or all the way in Bangladesh or in China, to be more transparent and more responsible and cleaner on the environment, they're going to have to be. Yeah. And that way we don't have to take business away from countries and devastate them, that we can all work together as a global community to really change the
new
system.
Consumer is going to demand it anyway.
Yeah.
You can see it, the younger that your consumer, the more they're demanding it. And, we talk to kids and they're just not interested in H&M at all. They'd rather buy a pair of our jeans for $350 than a pair of $35 jeans because they're going to keep it for a long time. So the sustainability also matters in how you make things and how long it'll last.
Yes.
And I think we're going to see a big downslide in the fast fashion and uptick in things that are important. If you look at even the Gucci group, they're targeting younger people because the clothes, it's very expensive, but the clothes are made so well that people will keep them, these kids will keep them forever and give them to their kids. That's the thing that's happening. If you can make clothes that you can give to you can think generational, that's a very important part of sustainability. It's for us.
Yeah. You've succeeded.
100%.
Yeah. We actually own and operate our own factory in Los Angeles as well. But it's interesting because we're not very dogmatic about made in LA or made in the US. I think that the reason we did that was exactly what you mentioned to start with, which was control. We're control freaks. We like to see it. We have a business model that really requires a very quick turn, and that is really the strategic advantage of making clothes in Los Angeles. But the LA market is not easy. In some ways, they're actually less compliant or compliant ready than other factories outside of LA, which is for a consumer, that's hard to recognize, but it's a big deal. And if you're trying to make things in the most ethical way, and for us too, they do have to be more accessible in a price point. It's always a balance between, again, that strategic direction, and then what does a sustainable factory look like outside of the U.S. or LA? One of the things we joke about too is 35% of our customers not in the U.S. And so this idea of local is kind of blown up anyways. And I think that when you think about the future of fashion, it is going back to the idea of regionalism. How do you have raw materials and manufacturing and consumer bases that are a lot more tight-knit, but I think we have a new challenge of how to accomplish that in sort of this global economy.
Thank you. Alex, do you want to take us home?
Do I want to take?
Yeah. We have, well, wrap it up.
Yeah. That's it, yeah.
I personally just want to thank each and every one of you for what you're doing. And, we all know that just one little action creates another action and creates another, and we all affect each other. And so I'm just so humbled and grateful and inspired by all four of you and listening to you today. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.